On today's episode of Locked On Mariners, we're going to hand out a grade to Eugenio Suarez and discuss a pretty unhinged trade idea we cooked up on our Patreon show yesterday. Plus, the Mariners made a move this morning. Chills. Let's talk about it. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Friday, October 13th, 2023. This is Trident and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. On the show today, we'll be handing out a grade to Eugenio Suarez for his 2023 season, and we're going to discuss a pretty wild trade idea that we just want to put out there, have some fun. It's not going to happen, but we think it's kind of interesting. But before we do, Colby, we have kind of news to talk about. Chills, right? Chills?
No.
Per Red Sox beat reporter Chris Cotillo, the Mariners have claimed Kaleb Ort off of waivers from Boston. He is a 31-year-old right-handed reliever who his season ended abruptly due to an elbow injury. Went 23 innings pitched this year, 9.39 Ks per nine, 3.52 walks per nine, 6.26 ERA, 5.86 FIP. He was worth negative 0.2 F4, but it's a waiver claim. And it's a reliever waiver claim in the very, very, very early stages of the offseason, which, with the Mariners, you always got to pay attention to. So, Colby, is there something here? Anything?
A guy who's going to get non-tendered or waived in the next 3 weeks. Like, that's about it.
I mean, but you could have said that about Issa McGee, who obviously had a big impact on this team in 2023.
Yeah. You could have.
Mm-hmm.
You also could have said that about Luke Weaver, which ended up being the case. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, no, there is nothing here. It's a 95, 96 mile an hour fastball and a slider that generates whiffs, but also, got torched to the tune of an 800 slugging percentage. So,
ooh, that is not very good. Yeah.
Fastball, slider. He did generate whiffs on the slider, 32% whiff rate on that pitch. And the velo is nice, but it's not plus extension. As far as I can tell, it's not, plus ride or run on the heater or anything like that. And the numbers would tend to back that up. It's pretty much a 2-pitch guy. And, he doesn't throw a ton of strikes. It's not a huge weakness of his, but he's just a dude. I mean, he's Ryan Jensen, who is a Mariner, by the way. I don't know if you know that. And the fact that you didn't know that, you, the listener, tells you everything you need to know about who this guy is. You didn't even know that guy was in the org, and you won't even know this guy is. So he's just a dude, We'll see what the Mariners think they can do with him if they even get the shot. My guess is he's amongst those cut or DFA'd when, they have to add all the 40-day IL guys back to the roster. Then they try and sign him to a minor league deal. Can't imagine there's going to be a lot of competition there. But, he's just a dude. Like, there's nothing that jumps. It's a fastball. It's a slider. The slider has promise, but hasn't been good, period. And he throws kind of hard, but it's not an elite fastball either. So just middle relief profile. And he's 31.
Or he could be the next top 15 reliever in all of baseball developed by the Seattle Mariners organization late in his career.
Name the last person they did that to.
Paul Sewald.
That's the only one. Top 15? Yeah, it's only Paul.
Yeah, it's only Paul. I was trying to think of something else to stump you here, but I have nothing. Nothing. This is just your run-of-the-mill waiver ad. Nothing else to see here, really.
I mean, like, you hope he's Justin Topa, but Topa's better and with a better track record than this guy's ever had.
He's also coming off of an elbow injury. I don't know what the significance of that elbow injury is, but yeah, just looking at the profile overall, it doesn't seem that promising. Would be fairly surprised if he's on the right roster come spring training, but this is just the natural roster churn, especially here on October 13th, 2023. So if it becomes something more, we'll keep an eye on it. But for now, it doesn't really seem like anything will come of this.
Yeah, and it came at the expense of friend of the show, Brian O'Keefe.
Ooh, I did not see that.
Yes, he is the one who was DFA'd, not Ryan Jensen, not Dominic Leone. Yeah,
Weird.
so I assume they plan on offering O'Keefe another minor league deal. But Seattle probably can and should look to upgrade that catcher 3 spot in the organization with somebody with a little more upside, like perhaps one Joey Bart. But yeah, I imagine O'Keefe will be back on a minor league deal.
His name is Luis Torrens, Colby.
Not at $1.3 million.
Non-tender him, give him a smaller contract, or you just land on a smaller number in arbitration.
No.
Luis Torrens, baby. This is coming from the number one Luis Torrens fan, Colby Patnote, who has a Luis Torrens foul ball from the
clinching game.
Yeah.
Torrens ended that at bat with a base hit. Yes, it was like a 12 pitch at bat.
Wow. All
Indeed.
right. Let's move on to our report card. We're going to be talking about Eugenio Suarez, giving him a grade for his 2023 season in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Sleeper. All right, folks, the MLB playoffs are right around the corner, which means the clock is ticking on your chance to 100 times your cash on daily fantasy baseball. Pick more or less on stats for your favorite players like home runs, hits, strikeouts, and more for up to a 100 times payout on Sleeper. Get your picks right, and you could win big, my friend. If things didn't go well in your home league this year, no worries. You can still salvage the fantasy baseball season over at Sleeper. There you can pick the players you want and call your shot. And when you use the promo code Locked On, that's LOCKEDON, you'll get up to $100 matched on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Currently operational in over 30 states. Check out Sleeper today. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. So we're going to continue our report card series here on the Locked On Mariners podcast, looking back on the Mariners 2023 season and going through individual players and how their seasons went. And now we're landing on Eugenio Suarez. We did second base yesterday. We went through Josh Rojas and Colton Wong and Dylan Moore and Jose Caballero. We did Ty France and Mike Ford the other day. We did Cal Raleigh and Tom Murphy. Now it's Gino's turn. Gino on the year offensively, 232, 323, 391. That's his triple slash line on the year. That's batting average, on base percentage, and slugging percentage in that order. 102 WRC plus. He was worth 3.2 F4. We'll get to that and why that number was still so high in just a moment. 30.8% K rate, which is actually 0.4% down from where it was in 2022. His walk rate did fall about 1.5% down to 10.1%. He slugged 22 home runs, 96 RBI, even had a couple of steals on the year. But the defense was really doing the heavy lifting in terms of his value this year. He was one of the best defensive third basemen in the league. I think he has a real shot to compete for a Gold Glove. I don't know if he'll actually win it, but I think he's certainly deserving. He had a great year defensively, but offensively speaking, while the batting average is only 4 points below what it was in 2022, and the on-base percentage is only 9 points below what it was in 2022, the slugging percentage was significantly down, about 60 points for Gino this year. He had some bad luck, but also just wasn't able to provide any sort of consistency in the middle of the Mariners lineup. So, Colby, how do you feel about Gino's 2023 season?
To C plus, B minus, maybe. Like 3 wins is 3 wins. That's a good number, and obviously, the RBI is totally fine, and the average and the on base percentage are about in line with kind of what you'd expect, but that slugging percentage is a massive problem. And it's kind of the reason that you traded for Gino is to, hit home runs and to post 450 slugging and do all that stuff. So It's nice that in a year where he didn't really slug, that he still found a way to help you, but it's not what you pay him for. It's not the role that he needs to fill on this team. So, it's a little bit of that is combined with Ty France giving you nothing in the power department that really makes that sting even more. But at the end of the day, Gino, I think C plus, B minus, based on what he was last year and what he was this. I would have much preferred last year's Gino to this year's, even with the defense being significantly better this year. So yeah, it's not a failure of a season. It wasn't really a good one. It was just kind of it was solid. It was solid, B minus work, and I think that's pretty much what it would be is C plus or a B minus somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I'll go C plus. Your third baseman has to post a slugging percentage above 400. Like, has to. Like 391 isn't going to cut it unless you're making up for it at a position that doesn't usually produce that kind of power.
Right. You just kind of flip the second base and third base production. So a second baseman producing like a third baseman makes a third baseman producing like a second baseman.
Yeah.
Easy. So like, well, we don't particularly subscribe to the idea of like you have to fit this model to be this position. You do have to, make up for that. If most of the league has a third baseman who's hitting 30 home runs and yours is only hitting 15, you have to make up for that somewhere else. So the overall, the lineup just has to work. You have to have guys who get on base, guys who hit for power. It doesn't really matter what position they play. It's just traditionally speaking, it's a lot easier to find guys who play in the corners who hit for power than it is to find guys who play up the middle that hit for power. So that's why traditionally you want your first baseman, third baseman to hit a lot of home runs and doubles.
And with Gino, he plays on the WBC. Ryan Divish says that he heard that he showed up a little heavy to camp and then ends up playing 162 games, starting 161 of them. And I think we've said this over the last couple of shows that it's probably a byproduct of Scott Service not having enough depth on that roster and just going, well, Gino gives me the best shot to win, so I kind of just have to play Gino. But at the end of the day, I think it negatively impacted Gino's season. I think that's pretty obvious. It looked like he was gassed at times, visibly. And I'm not necessarily blaming Gino for that. And even if he did, show up to camp a little bit heavy, I'm not really blaming his conditioning on that either. I mean, pretty much every player in Major League Baseball should get at least a couple of days off over the course of a 162 game season.
I don't think there's really any point for a player to play more than 150 games in a season, which is essentially a day off every 10 to 14 days.
Yeah.
Like that's just smart, and it's not, they just didn't even find a lot of DH days for him either. And it just, it just looked like a guy who was out of gas. That's a lot of, because the WBC is high leverage baseball. Like, so that is a ton of like impactful, serious baseball that is being played. And Gino is not 24 years old anymore. And even if he was, it's still too much. So
and if you get into the playoffs, you're asking him to play another, 2 to 16 games, and he, like you said, he didn't get really any DH days. He DH'd 3 times this year. 3 times. He played third base 159 times this year. Like, it's unacceptable. It's unacceptable no matter what your depth situation is. They needed to get him more time off of his feet, whether he wanted that or not either. Like, it's great that he wanted to do this, and it's a cool accomplishment, in a vacuum, but overall I think it hurt Gino, and by virtue hurt the team at the end of the day. So so if Gino's back next year, hopefully he's playing like 130-ish times in the field at most, and then getting DH days and getting some days off of his feet entirely sprinkled in there. So let's talk about a trade idea that you and I kind of cooked up out of nowhere on our Patreon show yesterday, which may or may not involve the man that we just talked about. Going to go over that in just a moment. But first, a reminder, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. October baseball is back, folks, and you can make your postseason debut with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Join FanDuel today, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on, that's LOCKDON, to create your new account, and you can get in on the action from the first pitch until the final out. Bet on everything from strikeouts to home runs to who will win the game. And if you don't want to wait the whole game to get a win, predict what will happen in the next at bat with quick bets. So head on over to FanDuel.com/locked-on right now. Step up to the plate this postseason with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. So listen, folks, it's October 13th. The Mariners didn't make the playoffs. There's really nothing that they can do outside of adding guys like Kaleb Ort until 5 days after the World Series, which is going to be sometime in the second week of November, late in the first week of November. So we've been throwing out trade ideas. We love roster building. You know us, and you know what we like to do here for the most part. We love the off season, and Colby's been throwing out some trade ideas on the Twitter account, having you guys vote on the polls. And we spent decent amount of time on our Patreon show yesterday, patreon.com/control the zone. Just kind of throwing out some trade ideas or throwing out some names that we think could be possible, trying to think outside the box, etc. And so when we were thinking outside the box, we did come up with one idea. And look, this is
whoa. Hold on real fast.
You
You came up with the trade.
I came up
with like, oh, this is kind of an interesting idea. And then you're like, oh, well, this trade could make that happen.
Right. Okay.
So
all right. You
it's
came up
your
with the
trade,
name. You came up
but
with the
it's-
name. All right.
It's
But
like my target idea, like
Sure.
surprise target.
Sure. All right.
So
all right.
if you hate the trade, it's Ty's fault.
right.
If
Look.
you like the player that I'm talking about, like that's all me. So
It's all right. So let's preface this by saying, like, this is not going to happen. It's not going to happen, but let's
probably not.
just throw it out there. Let's let you guys just kind of think it over, mull it over.
Mhm.
So the Mariners need a corner outfielder to replace Teoscar Hernandez. Doesn't seem like Teo's coming back. So the Mariners are going to need to go out and get a corner outfielder. The Blue Jays are most likely going to bid farewell to Matt Chapman, who's becoming a free agent this offseason. So they might need a third baseman. Now they do have Santiago Espinal and Kevin Biggio who could man that position, but they probably should not do that. They probably should add
Only if
someone
they're
else.
smart.
Yeah. So Colby yesterday on the Patreon show mentioned George Springer. And I was like, well, George Springer's making money. Who on the Mariners is making money where you could like kind of contract swap it, but also address a couple of needs on both teams? Eugenio Suarez is making a little bit of money. Eugenio Suarez is due $11 million this year, or 2024. He has a $15 million club option in 2025. George Springer has 3 years left on his deal. He's making about $24 million per. What if they essentially swap those contracts? It's not a perfect contract swap, but and there's probably other pieces that would have to be involved here, but just on the surface, Colby, what do you think about George Springer and the Mariners, and then Eugenio Suarez going to Toronto? And we'll talk about like what you would have to do after that and all that in a second. But just in a vacuum, what do you think about that deal?
Well, I really like the George Springer idea because that seems like a unique name that nobody's brought up before, and like we know that the Blue Jays don't have endless amounts of money, and we know that they're working very hard to sign Bo and Vlad to their extensions, and they have pitching issues, and they have issues at third base. They're losing quite a few key contributors off of this team this year.
Mhm.
They got a lot of holes to fill.
Yep.
So I feel like maybe George Springer and his inflated salary is something that they would consider moving. So Springer, he played in 150 some odd games this year, but he really battled through some nagging injuries throughout the year. Still posted, a 2020 season. The numbers themselves were fine, but just a 2.2 win player, center field, just like it's time. He's 34 years old. So I think his fit in left field or right field in Seattle is actually pretty good. He's got right-handed power. We know that. It plays at T-Mobile Park. We already know that. He has played in a ton of playoff baseball. He's, produced along the way. He was a really good player last year. He was really good the year before that. So this is kind of the first year. Yes, the age is a concern. He's 34. So typically bat speed, foot speed, you lose a little bit of that. But again, we're talking about a guy who, most years is a 125 WRC plus, pretty good leadership skills and clubhouse guy from what we know. Plenty of playoff experience. I think Springer is kind of a fun little like, hey, is that a guy nobody's talking about who could be available via trade? Yeah, I think it could be, and I think that I don't know if Gino is the right guy to make that trade. You might not need to trade any big leaguers, but I do think that third base is a position that the Blue Jays need to go out and address, and it's not a good market whatsoever. Like Chapman is literally the only everyday third baseman on the market. So yeah, I mean they could just sign Chapman, but then they're probably saying goodbye to Belt and Merrifield, and maybe depending on how long the contract is, maybe they're saying goodbye to. Maybe they're saying goodbye to Vlad or Bo or somebody like that, or like Gossman or whoever, right? It doesn't really matter. So yeah, I do think that it's like interesting, and this is kind of the show that kind of gave birth to the whole idea of like, hey, a reliever for Teoscar Hernandez. So,
who came up with that idea?
We both did. You were specific on Swanson though.
No, I didn't say Swanson. I said Chris Flexen.
Oh yeah,
I'll own up to that.
That's
I'll own
right.
up to that. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, you were way off.
It was Flexen. I think it was Flexen and Murphy for Teo.
Yeah, you were way off. But whatever. Anyways,
Penn Murphy, by the way, not Tom.
Yeah. But yeah, so Toronto and Seattle, they will trade with each other, even though there's a bit of a rivalry. Like they'll trade with each other, and so I like the idea of George. The problem I have with trading Gino is what I just talked about. Like there are no good third basemen.
Where this deal is probably dead on arrival is that it's just easier to go get corner outfield help than it is third base, especially this year. Even in this market, like there's going to be corner outfielders out there that you can go get. Whereas at third base, I mean, I think at that point, if they did trade Gino, you and I are getting on the show and pounding the table for Jhamir Candelario.
Candelario doesn't seem like a third baseman anymore.
But what's the other option?
That's what I'm saying. There isn't one. You have to go trade for another third baseman, or you have to sign Matt Chapman. And frankly, I'd rather just keep Gino and sign Lourdes Gurriel than trade Gino, sign Chapman, and acquire Springer. So yeah. But no, I like the Springer idea. I do. Just a matter of, does it work with money? And probably not. As a prospects only, that doesn't really make a lot of sense for Toronto. It's just tough to find a deal there. That makes a lot of sense. And
trying to wrap my head around it, I feel like the only deal that Toronto would be open to is if they were getting Gino back.
Yeah, and it's just like, I mean, do the Mariners want to see if they could pry Maikel Garcia away from the Royals or something like that, or do they want to see if they can get Kevin Biggio in this deal? Or they do have Josh Rojas, who is better at third than he is at second, but now you have to go find a second baseman. And
again, going back to our conversation earlier, if you are able to make up for it at second base, if you're able to make up for like what Josh Rojas lacks and maybe power output, I mean, he can hit for a little bit of power, but if you can make up for that at second base or another position, then yeah, you can make that work in theory. But
you know who a second baseman who hits for power is, Ty?
Who? Colby?
Jazz Chisholm. Boom. Figured it out.
Go to Twitter. go check out the poll that Colby posted today.
By the way, just you guys will notice that Ty and I have not once mentioned that George is a former Astro who was on that cheating team, and that is because I do not care.
I did put it on here. A former foe turned friend. Yeah,
but I do not care. Yeah. I just don't. I want to win, and honestly, to be fully transparent, I've been a huge fan of George Springer, like the person, for a long time, and the ball player. So yeah, a little bit of this is like, oh, I've always wanted that guy on my team, and now I might have a shot to get him. Cool. So But I also think he's still a quality baseball player. And is he worth $25 million a year? No, but that's probably why he's available, or why he might be available.
And for the
Toronto,
first year, if you did trade Gino, if you're looking at just like the
it's
salary
a net
swaps,
of like $11 million
yeah,
bucks.
George
14
Springer
million, somewhere in
essentially
that range.
becomes like a $14 million player for you, or a $13 million player for you for the
Right.
first year.
Right. And so, plus, maybe Toronto eats some money. I don't know. I think it's an interesting idea. And again, we're October 13th. We have at least a month before like any like real trade talk can start.
Yeah.
Although I did hear that the Mariners are already pretty deep in some trade talks with a handful of teams, and that's to be expected. So hopefully that's a sign that the Mariners are going to come out of the gate swinging, because I think they need to, be aggressive early
You
in
got
the
to set the
offseason.
tone. Yeah, you
Yeah.
got to set the tone. Yeah,
So I hope that's what we see. And you remember, I think it was Jerry's first year here. It was only a couple days into the off season that he swung the Brad Miller for Logan Morrison trade. So it's
Brad
not like
Miller for Logan Morrison. No, it was Brad Miller and Logan Morrison and Danny Farquhar
yeah,
to the Rays.
to Tampa for who was in that deal? Give me a second.
I know all three off the top of the bat.
Was this one of the deals that Ref Snyder was involved in, or
Yeah.
Hauser or whatever?
Yeah, Riefenhauser. CJ Riefenhauser. That's so funny that's the first guy that you named.
Well, just because they acquired him twice.
I don't know if you saw Jerry on Cespedes Barbecue like a couple years ago. They asked him about that trade, if he could remember that trade, and CJ Riefenhauser was the one guy he could not name. So it's really funny that you remembered CJ
Sure,
Riefenhauser.
of course I do. That wasn't. No, Malik Smith was a different trade with the Rays. There were so many trades.
That was like a year later or 2 years later.
Yeah, there are so many trades early with the Rays. Is Boog Powell in that deal?
Actually, that was like 4 years later. Boog Powell was, in that trade, yes.
And so there was one.
There's one other guy.
Is it Taylor Motter?
What? Nope.
So there were a lot of early trades between those two teams.
This is gonna give it away, but he was traded for Gerard Dyson later on.
Oh, Nate Carnes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
it was Nate Carnes, Boog Powell, CJ Riefenhauser.
I thought that was a completely separate deal. That's like, I was like, I know they traded for Carnes pretty early on, but I think that was in like 2017. But yeah.
There you go. That's been Mariners trade trivia with Colby and Ty.
Quick Ty. What was the trade that happened the night before Thanksgiving?
That was Gene Segura and Mitch Haniger
for
Ketel Marte and Taijuan Walker.
You're missing a piece.
Am I?
Yes, you are.
Oh yeah. Zach Curtis.
Mm-hmm. And
was there someone else in that deal?
Yeah, a certain left-handed pitcher.
Huh?
Mm-hmm.
Hold on. What? Left-handed pitcher from the Mariners to the Diamondbacks?
I'm messing with you, man.
Oh, you're messing with me? Oh, okay.
No. That was not the other deal where Riefenhauser or whatever.
Riefenhauser?
Yeah.
Oh, were you trying to hint that it was CJ Riefenhauser was on that deal?
Yeah. I was trying to get you to bite on that.
Didn't land.
No, clearly not. That was in 2016, right?
2016, Thanksgiving 2016.
That was so it was right after the Boog Powell Nate Carnes trade.
Yep. All right, we're doing that thing where we're naming some guys.
Yeah.
That's a CTZ
that's the
thing.
Fun thing.
That's a CTZ
By the way,
thing.
Riefenhauser was traded
to Baltimore.
Yes, originally.
Yeah.
He didn't go alone.
I could not tell you who he went with.
You could probably tell me who came back, because it was
it was the Clevenger deal.
Yeah.
So it was Trumbo and Riefenhauser for Clevenger. Okay. I kind of had a feeling that it was that deal, but I wasn't entirely sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because that was the same offseason. That was like a month later or something that they did that. That was like right after they signed Kuma back, and then they had to dump payroll.
That trade was in December of 2015. So
it was right after they got Kuma.
It was less than a month after they acquired him.
Yeah.
that they
Yeah. I think it was they signed Kuma, which was a surprise because like he agreed with LA.
that was at the Christmas party.
Yeah, and I think like a couple days later they traded Trumbo for payroll purposes, right?
I think those flipped, but yeah,
Really? All right,
I'm
whatever.
pretty sure, but whatever, doesn't matter.
All right,
Bye.
well, that's gonna do it for us. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. Colby Patnode, I'm Trident Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. Follow me at Dane Gonzalez, CANEGNZLZ. And Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. And thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day. We'll see you next week. Peace.